Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong, and we have a huge show for you today. First joining me is former EU negotiator involved in hostage talks, as well as ceasefire talks, Alastair Crooke. He will be joining me in just a minute. And then we have a huge stream with some surprise guests just after the hour, and I will let you know then. So be sure to stick around. But right now, the West is collapsing. The Ukraine conflict is causing deepening anger inside of Russia, especially with regard to Vladimir Putin's next moves and latest moves in retaliation to these attacks on Russian territory. We also have Iran seemingly preparing for war with this intelligence move that has shocked Israel, and a phone call between Trump and Netanyahu that seems to signal that Israel is in trouble. But to get to all of this, we are joined by Alastair Crooke back on the show. It is really good to have you back on. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. Everyone hit that like button as we get started. So I wanted to ask you first, Alastair, talk about this misunderstanding, it seems, of Vladimir Putin. I wanted to actually play. So we have Trump, on the one hand, calling the Ukraine conflict a kind of conflict between school children. And I wanted to also play Ursula von der Leyen. Her pronouncement of sanctions during a press conference had some choice words for Russia. Here's what she had to say.
We want peace for Ukraine. Despite weeks of diplomatic attempts, despite President Zelensky's offer of an unconditional ceasefire, Russia continues to bring death and destruction to Ukraine. Russia's goal is not peace, it is to impose the rule of might. Therefore, we are ramping up pressure on Russia because strength is the only language that Russia will understand.
So, Alastair, help us understand what is going on here with regard to this conflict, because on the one hand, we have Europe charging and pressing toward more escalations. We also have a very confused policy, seems, on the part of Donald Trump as these escalations ramp up in the actual conflict. So help the audience understand.
Well, let's leave aside the war party that we just heard, if you like, advocating for war against Russia and saying it's all one-sided and it's all Putin's fault, because this is just the narrative of the Europeans, which reflects desperation. Doesn't reflect any sense of thought within it. I think Trump's position is much more complex as we look at it. He has always said from the start of this campaign that he wanted to normalize relations with Russia. And why? He indicated that normalizing relations with Russia would actually contribute greatly to ending the forever wars. He hinted, and then Rubio took it up in some of the hearings. He talked about, if you like, spheres, that we were going back to the 19th century idea of a concert of sort of great states, and that would be the future. However, since then, what we have seen is, first of all, two things. One is this recent, attempted attack on the strategic aircraft bombers that provide Russia's strategic nuclear defense system. Now, people have laughed at them and say, but they were all set out on the runway, because that's what the START Treaty, which was signed between the United States and Russia, demands. It demands that the aircraft should be visible on the, if you like, at the airport, so that America can ascertain whether they are armed with conventional weapons or possibly nuclear weapons. And the same applies to the United States aircraft. And then we had, if you like, an attempt to attack all 5 of the strategic bases, though in three cases, it seems that whatever happened, the roof of the truck or the container in which the missiles were hidden didn't open, or the missiles misfired, or something went wrong. But so 3 of them were a flop, failed. But 2 succeeded, and there are extraordinary numbers sort of mooted around. But from my understanding and talking to people in Russia and talking and looking at the satellite photographs, although some of these satellite photographs look as if they've been messed around with artificial intelligence, but I would say probably between 5 and 7 aircraft were damaged, and even perhaps 3 were written off. But we don't know, and the Russians haven't given any real, if you like, detail on how many were damaged, but it was not significant. So we've had people call this a pinprick. That is grossly misleading, very misleading, because this is an attack, an attempted attack, on, if you like, one part of a major nuclear power's triad, defensive, deterrent triad. And of course, the question that must be preoccupying Putin and the leadership is, yes, okay, it turned out to be what you call in America, I think, a nothing burger, largely. But what happened if it succeeded? What happened if they try again and succeed? You know, it is not acceptable to lose most of your strategic bombers in this case. But secondly, and this is the other thing that is missing, is Putin must say to himself, yeah, but what's behind this? Are they probing our strategic bomber strength? Are they trying to find weaknesses in the defenses? Are they trying to find, you know, the electronic systems or things that might be defending against these sources, so that we can think about coming back and destroying them more effectively? I mean, you know, because what we're talking about is the ability to prevent, on both sides, the START treaties are about preventing a first strike by an adversary, a first nuclear strike, overwhelming strike that prevents a retaliation in consequences. We're talking actually the most serious, really the most serious strategies that you can imagine. And one, a friend of ours, Larry Johnson, who I think you know, who is in Moscow, told me that he spoke to a Russian general. He was there, and last night spoke with this Russian general who used to be on the coordinating staff. And he said, look, we came as close to a nuclear exchange then as the time of the Cuban crisis. This was the closest we've been. Putin was furious. So don't listen. And Lavrov said this, and others said it. Don't listen to those people who are saying, oh, hey, you know, we're playing it down. We're not playing it down. It's very serious. And I'm sure from what I hear from Moscow, that when Putin spoke with Trump, he didn't pull his punches. He was pretty direct. Now, Trump says he didn't know. Well, that's what Trump says. Whether Putin believes that or believes this is plausible deniability in operation, I can't tell you. But I can tell you he's furious. And the consequences of this is that the Russians are going full out now to finish off the conflict in Ukraine. What you've seen so far is just the beginnings. There's much more still to come on this. So if the idea in the team, even if Trump wasn't informed about it, was that somehow, and some of his advisors seem to have given that impression, Keith Kellogg, General Kellogg, it put out a tweet not so long ago saying, well, you know, in my long experience as a general and a military man, I believe that, you know, really audacious, innovative, special forces type strikes can change the paradigm and can force a different outcome. In other words, he was basically saying, well, you know, it might have worked and it might have forced Putin to accept a ceasefire, which Putin has made clear to Witkoff and Lavrov has said endlessly, would only weaken Putin and would also, of course, trap Russia in a prolonged, unending war for the future, as the ceasefire would allow the West to rearm and to retrain the Ukrainians, and it would waste blood. I was in Russia about 10 days ago, a week ago, in St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg is the liberal capital, as you know, of Russia. But everyone there and everyone, the Russians, all said, you know, it's absolutely, the paradigm has changed. Everyone now understands clearly, you know, we've spent blood on this. And if we have a deal now or a ceasefire, we know that that blood will have been wasted, because in 3 or 4 years' time, we're going to have to spend the blood a second time with our children. And this is not acceptable. And it's not just the liberals saying it, it is across the board. So when there used to be some pressure, if you like, on Putin, and people would say, well, why doesn't Putin, you know, accelerate the attacks? Why doesn't he go further? All of that is gone because everyone there understands Putin gets it completely. He understands this, and what is more, he understands more about this, and he's really angry, and so are the Russian people. It's changed the mood there. When I was there 10 days ago, it has very much changed. So what we're seeing is a very important shift. If that was the plan, if it was the plan by Kellogg and the team to try and put pressure on Putin to accept a ceasefire, it has absolutely misfired. It has completely gone the opposite way. It has just stiffened the resolve not to trust Trump, not to trust America, not to be fooled into a ceasefire, but to complete the job.
Yeah, all of that makes a lot of sense. And now, I don't know if you've seen all the reports in response to this, Alastair. There's a lot of reports in the Western mainstream media talking about what is to come. What will Russia do? They're reacting to, of course, what you just explained, the massive attacks in response on Kiev and various other areas of Ukraine by Russia through drones and missiles. But a lot of them say, well, Putin in Russia they don't have any real cards left, that actually Russia is cornered and backed against the wall, and the response has been soft. What do you say to this, and what's your understanding of what might be coming, given that you believe that this is going to escalate quite intensely?
I mean, this is the old canard that we've been told. Oh, Putin really doesn't have the you know, he's been going soft, he's too liberal on this. And as I said, from, you know, being in the liberal capital of Russia, nobody's saying that today. There's full support for Putin, and they understand what he's doing now in this. He's not looking for a deal with Trump, quite the reverse. What he's doing is playing chess with that delicate US psyche that can suddenly explode and say, oh my God, this is 9/11, this is Pearl Harbor, this is, oh, woe is me, we must do something. So he knows that that is the case. And he also knows, and this has always been a concern of his, he has to manage this in a way, because, you know, again, you've only got to go to St. Petersburg or anywhere else in Russia, and you realize, you know, the demographic consequences of the Great Patriotic War. And how many, I mean, just in St. Petersburg alone, Leningrad at the time, under the siege, nearly 1 million, 800,000 to 1 million civilians died of starvation or of illness, or just simply were killed in this process. So there's a real sense of him of you know, taking care of demography, of not wasting, you know, Russian lives on this. So it will not be, you know, a grand heroic charge of the Light Brigade into the sort of, into the forces of the opposition that ended up with all of the Light Brigade destroyed. No, he's not going to do that. He's going to do it systematically and carefully and bring the ability of Ukraine to fight this conflict to an end. And then we will see what happens politically in terms of what will be arranged politically. And we'll see what the consequences are for the leadership in Kiev. The other thing I should just mention is that this is important because people have misunderstood it. What he's talked about the if you like, the terrorist element of it, but this is about a procedural change. They are in the process of changing the special operation to a counter-terrorist operation. The Chechen war is a counter-terrorist operation. The war, if you like, in Ukraine is essentially a special operation. What does it matter is that it puts a different framework on it and allows legally different reactions. For example, legally, it would be not permitted, if you like, to kill the leaders in Kiev under a special operation. But once they are defined as terrorists, then all that changes. So certain legal things which matter to Russia change with us. It's got to pass through the Duma, I believe, so it's still waiting to be passed, but it'll be passed, there's no doubt. And then it'll be in a different format. So that was the other thing that's happened. No, I think the people that say Putin is soft or other just don't know how much the Russians have suffered, not only in the Great Patriotic War, but have suffered much more recently. That's why they're so angry, because, you know, during the 90s, with the Western attempt at what they call the Great Economic Shock Treatment, which, you know, reduced people to absolute poverty, you know, and the death mortality rates were skyrocketing. So were infant mortality rates. People were begging on the streets. People were selling their children. It was dire. This was imposed by, you know, the Harvard boys in the 90s on Russia. And they came out of that. They pulled themselves out of communism. They pulled themselves through this. And then once they got out of that, they then found that the West has now started a new war against Russia. And they are furious with that. I mean, they just say, you know, we can be rude too. You want to be rude to us? We will just be rude back at you. So there's a lot of anger there. And you have to understand it against that context. Just as they were getting back to normality, you know, they're now facing a longer term war.
Yeah, in your response, you know, so-called German intelligence recently came out with a report saying that Russia is going to not stop at Ukraine, as they've been saying this for a while, but that they'll send little green men, this was a direct quote from German intelligence, to places like Estonia to supposedly, as they kind of mockingly put it, liberate oppressed minorities there. What do you make of this, given your extensive understanding and experience in intelligence and working with intelligence?
I don't believe a word of it. That's the quick answer. I don't think they know what Putin is going to do. I just disbelieve all those people who claim to have, you know, sources close to Putin, who tell British intelligence or German intelligence what the plans are. You know, and pull the other leg. It's not real. It's not likely. As for the idea, little green men was a sort of contrivance that the West brought up for their narratives at the time of the Crimean incident. Look, I don't know what Putin is planning, but this is not going to be a sort of, if you like, a small asymmetrical war. He's going in for a proper war now, full-time counter-terrorist war. It's going to be serious, and he will pursue it. And, you know, there's no suggestion, you know, you widen it. I mean, it's the West that's trying to widen it. It's the West who's suggesting that Russia is going to attack Transnistria and perhaps take over in Moldavia. Well, the Russians have a base in Transnistria. They don't need to. They don't need to take over Moldavia. Where else are they going to go? To the Baltic republics? Why would they want the Baltic republics? If you look at the map, I mean, Russia's not short of land or space. They don't need Lebensraum, as the Germans call it, at all. They've got more than enough of that. So they're not threatening Europe. They're not threatening other states unless those states actively take part in threatening Russia. And it seems that some European states, Lavrov made that as allegation, that claim, 100% claim that he believed that Britain was involved in some of the acts of terrorism that took place last weekend. But there won't be a sort of out of the blue attacks on other neighboring states. His aim has always been, and I spoke often with Russians about it, there is a sort of strange reaction. I can understand it because I'm Irish and have lived in Ireland. And we have this strange ambivalence in Ireland between Protestants and Catholics and IRA and the British there. And it's been going on for a long time. Now, they have that in Ukraine too. But this, they don't see them as objects to be hated, to be destroyed and killed. They see them as something to be reconciled and brought together, that, they are a deeply estranged family, deeply estranged. I don't know how possible it is, but I think one of the aims is to try and fold Ukraine back into some form of, the bigger vision of what it is to be Russia.
Right. Yeah. And Vladimir Medinsky said this actually as well in a recent interview. He said those exact words that you put up, that it's almost like a fight between families. And the longer that this goes on, the more those divisions between, Russians and those in Ukraine become. So maybe could you talk about the consequences? And you outlined that this war is moving toward a counter-terror operation for Russia. And what will be exactly the consequences for Ukraine in the short and into the long term? Because it seems that Europe is very committed to keeping this thing going. And the Trump administration, of course, has a lot of problems with balancing many priorities that I know you've talked about on other programs with this. For whatever reasons, there are many speculations about what reasons Trump has to want to pursue an end to this. But your take on this, on what the consequences will ultimately be?
Well, the consequences will be the defeat of Ukraine, and there will be some form of change of government that will take place there. In what way, I can't tell. It's too early to say. But there will be a change of government, and there will be an agreement that eventually will come about, which will establish neutrality and which will establish, if you like, sort of rules of the ground about what military forces can be in Ukraine. So, I mean, this is very important in the sense that, this was missing from the American understanding of the ceasefire. They kept talking about it, in this Western liberal peace ideology, that here is Ukraine, here is Russia. Let's split the difference, a few more oblasts this way, a few that way. This is how we find common ground. And what I say is, actually Russia is insisting on neutrality. Neutrality, is it a thing? I mean, can you divide it up? No, neutrality is a state of mind. I mean, the Swiss had the state of mind for a long time. And sovereignty, it's not something, a thing, an object that you can put out and place on a table. It's a state of mind. Those that are sovereign are those that feel themselves, see themselves to be sovereign. So how do you divide that up? How do you divide up, a little bit of neutrality for this way and a little bit of neutrality for that way, a little bit of sovereignty less for Russia here, a little bit more sovereign, where you've got really deep and irreconcilable conflicts. This sort of liberal peace ideology sometimes just doesn't work, and it has to be pursued further. So I think that's what we will see. It will end up with a defeat, and this, of course, poses a question. This poses a very important question about what is the true intent of Washington, because a ceasefire on the lines that was proposed, the 21 points that Keith Kellogg, the strategists of Team Trump, presented. I mean, this strategy was intended, if you like, to freeze the conflict. It even said that, freezing the conflict was more important than making a political framework. So that, let's have the freezing first, and then you can talk about things afterwards. I think quite likely he'd taken this from the Korea example and had said, this is how we did it in Korea. We'd frozen it, and then they could talk about the future forever after. Well, actually, they still haven't reached an agreement on that. They're still talking about it. So it was for, pushing things to the never, never land. So I think the question that comes, and the question that's coming in Moscow, in the light of this failed operation against the Russian airfields and against the bridge and against the trains, all of that comes to the question, does Trump truly want to have a deal with Russia, a deal which means a relationship? And when Russia talks about a relationship, what that means is, on both sides, what you say, you mean, and what you do. And that has to work both ways. I mean, it's not trust, it's not the same thing. But when you say something, it means you mean it, you say it, and you will do it. And they don't know if that is the case with Trump. In fact, they're beginning to believe it may not be the case with President Trump. I don't know. I'm not trying to take a side on this thing. I'm just saying, the conduct by his team, the misreading of Russia that was done by his security team in their advocating pressure, more pressure, and pressure again on Putin, and that he'll cave and come into a frozen conflict, has actually had startlingly adverse and dangerous results. But it has also made them say, well, the question is, then Trump says things, but does he have the capability to do them, to implement them? Does he have the capability to improve relations, however incremental and slowly, with us? They must be asking these questions of themselves now. And they will look at the situation and they will see, first of all, that the Senate is holding the big, beautiful bill. That is the bill that is passing through the Senate, which both includes tax breaks and taxes on individuals and corporations, that this bill is being held up as a sort of hostage, with 81 of the senators saying, no, we want sanctions on Russia. We want to escalate. And we want to escalate in Iran too, by the way, because we don't accept any enrichment at all in Iran. So Trump must have known that, must have expected that. I mean, he has political feel, he has political intuition. So he's obviously sort of looked at that and thought about that. And what we don't see, and what Russia and Putin has said explicitly, I mean, not in the words I'm using exactly, but he's saying, we don't see any moves towards a relationship. Why not? Why doesn't Trump say it wouldn't be so difficult? We know from the New York Times, Biden issued, or someone issued a presidential finding instructing the CIA to pursue war deep into Russia. I mean, the New York Times explained all of that for us. So why doesn't Trump say either issue a new one or just say, look, oh, that was the Biden administration. Who knows who signed it? Maybe it was AutoPen. Anyway, it's not legitimate. So the CIA is not allowed to continue on the old Biden administration track, but that's exactly what's happening. The deep state and the CIA are just continuing the status quo from the Biden administration. And so increasingly, I think, people, and I'm not saying Putin does, but people in that circle that I'm sure are asking and saying, so did Trump really actually intend to have a relationship, or was it just to fool us into coming into this trap of a frozen conflict that was being advocated by Kellogg and his team and Jack Keane and others? Pressure. Russia never changes until pressure is put on it. You have to put pressure on Russia before you'll get it to move. Put them into this trap, this framework trap, from which they will be stuck in a long-term repeating conflict with the United States, whilst Trump quietly pivots to China, pleasing everyone, pleasing the deep state, pleasing the Senate, pleasing most of the American public. Is that the real plan? But now, the most important thing is here, this sort of mistake erodes confidence. Not just confidence, not trust, not just confidence in Russia, China for sure, but it feeds across to Iran. Does anyone think that they haven't noticed, this and the attack? Do you think they haven't gone back and thought, didn't we have some containers that suddenly explode at Bandar Abbas port? I mean, I wonder if that was in any way connected with what we've seen of exploding containers next to airports in Russia. They must be, so people must be thinking, if this was a trap for Russia, what trap is it that they're setting for us in Iran? And China does its own calculation. As Trump says, they are tough to negotiate. But the point I would make about all this is it also feeds through to his great desire. His primary purpose as a president has been to, if you like, to balance, if you like, the great overhang of debt, which rests on a diminished and ever smaller real productive base on the United States. And it has become so unbalanced, like a sort of inverted pyramid of debt spread globally around the world, but dollar-denominated debt over a tiny and getting smaller productive base. And the aim has been always to harmonize this. And so, he has various means for doing it. Devaluing the dollar, also persuading NATO. This is very much like what you do if you're in an Article 11 bankruptcy in the United States. You pull in the creditors quickly, get them paying in, so that you can reduce your debt, get your balance sheet back into some sort. So come on, NATO, 5%, all of you, quickly, do it. So, I mean, this follows the sort of pattern of, how you rearrange creditors in a bankruptcy. But underlying that is the deeper thing of, I think tariffs and things were a sort of shock and awe to try and get people to start, committing to giving large sums of money or to buying American products or to transferring products to do this rebalancing. But as always, with currencies, with debt, confidence is everything. Lose the confidence of the rest of the world. When the rest of the world starts saying, well, is it really safe? Is America that safe? Does Trump really know what he's doing with us? Every day now in the debt market, in the bond market, as it's called there, every day it's a sort of nail-biting edge to see whether there'll be enough buyers, foreign buyers, to pick up the new tranche of American debt. And, Trump has got something like 5 trillion to refinance before the midterms. A lot of money at higher rates, and with higher rates, you're going to have other problems taking place in the economy. He needs a fix of the economy urgently. And if you like, it's not working. It hasn't been working with Russia. It hasn't been working with China. It's not working with Iran. And so, what's the psyche? What is the psychic sort of sense of investors? You're going to go on plowing your savings back into US treasuries, 10-year treasuries, or you say, well, I think we'll put at least some of them somewhere else just to be safe. So for last month was the first time on the capital account that it turned negative. There were more outflows than there were inflows into the US trade capital account.
Well, I wanted to now pivot to West Asia, if we could, to close our time together, Alastair. And I wanted your comments on some contending developments. We have Israel. There's, I think, a motion in the parliament to dissolve the Knesset. Big pressure on Netanyahu there. There's also, of course, Iran, and the phone call that Trump and Netanyahu had. N12 Israeli media, they reported this quote from Donald Trump. "I want you to end the war," he reportedly said. "It's not just the Witkoff deal that could be reached. It's both." That means Gaza and Iran. "Finish it. The war is exhausting itself. Ending this war will help in negotiations with Iran and also the Saudis," saying that Israel, and then elaborating that Israel needs to take the attack off the table. But there was also this, Alastair. I wanted you to just get the full picture here, and then I'll let you go. This is what Mr. Eric Kurilla, the CENTCOM commander, had to say. Here we go.
If the president directed, is CENTCOM prepared to respond with overwhelming force to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran?
I have provided the Secretary of Defense and the President a wide range of options.
I take that as a yes.
Yes.
So, given your extensive experience in negotiations, talk about what's happening here, not only in relation to Israel, but this broader, back and forth that we've been seeing with Iran and the United States.
I mean, the first thing because I was in Iran for a week, about 2 weeks ago, and so I talk quite widely with people. Generally, the sense is they don't know whether there will be a deal or not. They're very skeptical because they feel actually that the Americans don't really know what they want. Their conditions, their terms are always changing. Witkoff says one thing, they come back with another thing. So they're not sure whether they are. But the view generally, and widely held, is that even if there's no deal, we'll take the risk. We'll accept the risk of that. Because a deal today would not bring as much benefit to the Iranians as many people think. Because so much of, if you like, what were sanctions under the JCPOA have changed. For example, if you like, the central bank that was originally sanctioned pre-2015 and also the National Oil Company are now no longer sanctioned in the JCPOA context of enrichment of uranium, but are sanctioned for supporting Palestinians. And then we have CATSA, another range of sanctions that have imposed since. And since that time, the lobby have been promoting bills that would mean that any deal would have to be approved by Congress, and the Congress would have the ability to cancel it on a 2/3 majority. So when you look at it, I mean, would there be a big change? Would there be a huge lifting of sanctions? Well, that wasn't the experience first time round with the JCPOA, rather the opposite. And also, it wasn't just the actual sanctions, it was the informal sanctions. When Trump took the US out of the deal, it was supposed to be that Europe could continue to do business under the JCPOA with Iran, but it didn't happen. Why? And I went, at the time, went to the banks and asked what was going on in London. And I went to have lunch at the board or something, and they said, listen, Alastair, just last week, we had a representative of the US Treasury sitting here, where you're sitting here, and he made it quite clear. He said, listen, look, you probably noticed that a number of European banks have received really hefty fines for money laundering or lack of due diligence. He said, don't deal with Iran. Best not to deal with Iran. And they didn't. So, it wasn't just the formal sanctions. It was the question of the whole relationship. So there is, getting back to your question, there is a sort of sense of, it's going to be much more difficult to get something. And Iran will not give up the right to enrichment. It's included in the NPT. The NPT, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, does not say a limit of enrichment. That is not included in it. You can enrich up to 99% under the NPT. It doesn't say you mustn't. They are intending to do this. All of the proposals that are coming from the Americans are quite dubious. That they're suggesting that there would be perhaps a consortium established that would provide enrichment initially in Iran, and this consortium, as the consortium comes into being, Iranian infrastructure would be destroyed, and then the consortium would fade away and would not be in Iran and would be gone. In other words, Iran would be like it has been for some time, with no source of uranium to run. This was the case with the medical reactor at Tehran, the research reactor, which is used mostly for producing medical isotopes and medicines and things. It's very important and very widely used nuclear processes in medicine. And some years ago, they ran out of 20%. 20% is miles away from a weapon of any sort. But they ran out of 20% enrichment. And what happened? They found buyers. They found people willing to sell it to Iran. And America said, no, you can't have it. So they know that if they lose on site, if you like, inside Iran enrichment, America at any time can just say, oh, we'll just turn off the tap. We don't like what you're doing. We'll turn off the tap. And your industry and everything that's dependent on nuclear energy will close down.
Talk about the implications for Israel here, especially in relation to this phone call. On the one hand, you have Israel, of course, continuing its onslaught in Gaza. You have the Gaza flotilla incident, once again, making headlines. But you also have a situation where Trump seemingly is being leaked out to be pressuring Netanyahu to end the carnage and the genocide in Gaza. But at the same time, and we've almost been here before earlier in his administration. So what do you make about the implications for Israel overall, as well as the regional situation, as not only the U.S.-Iran talks continue, but the overall situation in West Asia continues to evolve?
Well, the first thing to understand, and this is not controversial or can really be countered, is that Israel is not capable of, in any substantive way, attacking Iran, certainly not its nuclear facilities. I just want to say that, even the deepest bunker buster bombs that the US has, the GU-57s, can only reach down to 66 meters in depth. Even the latest nuclear weapons cannot get beyond 500 meters. And they would have to be flown by a B-2 and only 2 bombs per aircraft. And the Iranian nuclear facilities are half a mile deep and underneath a mountain, i.e. at least 800 meters and more down, and not even a single shaft. It goes down, it goes one way, it goes another way. They are not able to destroy those. Neither Israel nor the United States is likely to be able to destroy those. It would take something like 200 nuclear bombs to get down to that depth inside a mountain. All the centrifuges are mounted on earthquake-resistant, absorbent chassis, so that they can even tolerate large explosions taking place, or I can't remember what level on the Richter scale, but a high level of, if you like, earthquakes there. So they can't do that. So what's going on really is that Netanyahu is desperate. You rightly say the situation in Israel is really almost poised on internal civil violence, because they see half the population, if you like, the more westernized, Europeanized population of Israel, regard a coup as underway. The part of the right, what they call the messianic right, is staging a coup. They are quietly changing the political situation in Gaza. Smotrich is annexing quietly the whole of the West Bank, and Ben Gvir is changing all the rules on the Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif, Al-Aqsa, allowing more and more, if you like, settlers to come onto it, preparing for the sacrifice. So there is a big changes taking place, and this is causing a great deal of controversy and I mean the violence is intense. The police attack, the families demanding the hostages back. As if they were Palestinians. I mean, they're really vicious towards them. And there is this feeling that Netanyahu just is not obeying any of the laws. He's got rid of the head of Shin Bet, Ronan Bar. He has also now in the process of firing the AG, although the Attorney General, although she says she's not going, and nothing happens. And he progresses in this. He's ill. He has a pacemaker for his heart. He's had various operations. He's deeply unwell. He has to stop his court appearances regularly, has 2 doctors in attendance most of the time. And he's desperate. He needs something to get out of this process. It's open secret in Israel that Gaza is a failure and is unlikely to change. They just see this as a sort of waste of, young Israeli lives. I mean, I don't think we have to spend too much sympathy on that, because those young Israelis are also killing Palestinians and killing Palestinian children. So it's, this is war, and this is what they brought it to. But there is a deepening resentment and a sense of questioning, well, what is Israel? What does it stand for? How are we going to get out of this mess? It's a huge mess. And the tensions from that are really rocking the whole foundations of the state. Will Netanyahu survive till the summer recess? In the Knesset? I don't know. It's very much in the balance, because the Haredi, that is the Orthodox Jews, are threatening to pull out of the government unless they get a bill through that removes their obligation to military service. They won't fight in Gaza. And the Ashkenazi, if you like, the Europeanized, more secular Jews say, well, why do we have to send our boys and girls to be killed in Gaza? If you people won't do it, instead you go to and study the Torah all the time rather than fight for the country. So it's a bitter situation there. So it is coming apart. It is definitely coming apart. The answer is what will be the consequences? I don't know. It's a new situation. In the whole region is sort of teetering on the brink of some sort of explosion, one way or another, whether it comes in Iran or the consequences from Iran. What is Trump going to do? I mean, he's in a predicament, isn't he? I mean, he said, I'm going to do a deal with Iran, and he's not going to get a deal. He's not going to get a deal that says zero enrichment. And we will go, as Trump said in his last statement, we'll go wherever we want, we'll take whatever we want, we'll blow up whatever we want, we'll go into the laboratories and blow those up too, and we'll remove whatever we don't like there. That's not going to happen. So, what's he going to do next? When I was in Iran, and I'll sort of leave you with this thought on it, many Iranians, serious senior Iranians, but some of them said to me quite, look, there will be a deal or there won't be a deal. And if there is no deal, there may not be military consequences. And that was quite interesting. They said, no, because, they can't attack our nuclear. Look at the changes we've done in our missile program, the air defenses, which we had, last year and have been upgraded and augmented during this period. No, they can't, because also they know what will happen. And then suddenly into this equation, we have this new fact of Iran saying that they have acquired, not just recently, but over time, they've acquired a huge trove of intelligence on Israel's nuclear program in full detail. So they know where all, they say, I can't tell you if it's true, but they say they know all of the Israeli nuclear sites, their secret sites. And I suspect that perhaps, Netanyahu and maybe some of the senior commanders in Israel are having to have they're wringing their hands and wondering what we're going to do, because, we could risk complete obliteration if Iran really has the sort of intelligence on us.
Yeah, and maybe just in the final few minutes, Alastair, if Israel right now also is bombing Yemen. I believe they just bombed the Hodeidah port. And could you talk about, because for me, what a lot of people wonder about, given how Israel's behaving, of course, the U.S. is seemingly just total support for all of this. What do you see happening in all of these various points? You have Israel, of course, in seeming a protracted genocidal war in Gaza. You have Yemen, of course, continuing to take a stand for Gaza, and Israel contending with that. And then this question of Iran, and also Israel is expanding into Syria. It seems like a big mess. Could you just summarize what you feel like is the overall trajectory here moving forward?
Yes. Well, very briefly, in Gaza, you know that Hamas released this American-Israeli hostage and understood from the American side that that would result in supplies being provided to Gaza, relief coming into Gaza. It didn't happen. Then there was an agreement and a proposal. It was negotiated some time ago for release of hostages and an end to war. The Americans backed down on that. And they've opted to take Netanyahu's position on this and said, no, it'll just be a temporary ceasefire. No, it won't be permanent. It won't be an end to war as you want, and we'll have to renegotiate all the other aspects of it. Meanwhile, the Palestinians there are being pushed further and further into a tiny borderline enclosure from which no doubt they will be driven out of Gaza and onto some other location. In other words, ethnically cleansed. When you look at Russia, well, I've already said to you, where are the signs? Why do we not see any signs? Why isn't there a resumption of direct flights? Why isn't there some sort of incremental process towards a normalization of relations with Russia? Why do we see the same thing happening with China? The times come together, and then suddenly, after agreement is done, America puts new restrictions on tech products. And China says, okay, well, you won't get our raw earths. All of these things are not progressing. All of these things are coming to, at the moment, unless there's a big change, a bad end. And this is going to feed through and bleed into if you like, the distrust on the financial side, the one that's so important to Trump, which is to be able to maintain the dollar trading hegemony. He said that innumerable times. Yes, we want to do this, but we don't want to lose the primacy of the dollar in this period. And so I think, where is this all leading? It's leading to probably an erosion of this project. And it's urgent because the financial situation, it will not just be kept, at bay for long. As I said, every auction of American debt is fraught with some uncertainty, and everyone understands something must be done. But if interest rates start going up, then the stock market is going to start going down, and then there'll be squeals. Many, painful squeals coming out of holders of people with pensions and others in America saying, look, this isn't, what's going on? And now, of course, we have Los Angeles. So, I mean, it's is he able to take it forward? This is the big question. This is the big question that I have been, asking. Is he really? Does he have the power? I mean, we've heard all of the blustering and the threats at Russia and so on, but really, does he have the political base? Does he have the political weight actually to say something and mean it and do it and convince Putin and Xi and the Iranians that he does have the ability to change the paradigm?
Yeah, no, I think the word here is confidence. There is a huge erosion of confidence, especially in U.S. leadership, for whatever that is and however it is defined. It's declining by the day. Alastair Crooke, Mr. Alastair Crooke, thanks so much for joining me today. Everyone can find your Conflicts Forum Substack in the video description here. Is there any final words that you want to impart to the audience before you head out?
Just thank you for listening.
Of course. All right. Well, we'll have to have you back on again soon. Thanks so much for joining. Everyone, please do stick around. We have a lot more show to go. We actually have another panel coming up. A few of those guests are actually here now, so we can actually get started on that at this moment. We have KJ No. He is a geopolitical analyst, a journalist. He is host of Reports on China. KJ, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And then we also have Alino Sinofantos. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But
it's always a challenge.
Yes. But please correct me if I'm wrong.
It's good.
And you are a contributor to Colonial Outcasts, a great podcast everyone should follow. And anything else you want to say about who you are and what you're up to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically, I'm an international law and economic globalization specialist. I've worked for years in the realm of research with regards to international policy, particularly focused within the EU and the West, but how it impacts the global South. So, and at the moment, I produce some work for Colonial Outcasts as a contributor. I've often been on Mint Press as well. And I do also publish some of my own stuff on my own Substack and Patreon, etc., educational videos in order to help people decode, I guess, the imperialist economic structures and how they operate.
Well, definitely send those links in the private chat, and I'll put them in the video description. And then we have Lee Camp. Thanks so much for joining, host of Unredacted tonight. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Danny. How you doing?
I am all right. Thank you all for joining today. How about we begin actually in relation to the U.S.-China row, should we call it? There's been some breaking news on this to a certain extent. We have news that there has been a framework agreed upon during the U.S.-China trade talks that have been taking place. Here's what Donald Trump had to say in big capital letters. Deal with China is done, subject to final approval between President Xi and me. Full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied upfront by China. We will likewise provide what was agreed to, including Chinese students using our colleges and universities, which has always been good with me. We are getting a total 55% tariffs, China getting 10%. Relationship is excellent. So how about you, KJ? How about you begin? Talk about what's really going on here. How has this U.S.-China economic growth, but overall this conflict been taking shape?
Well, it's part of the larger escalation to war against China. We have to see this as part of a vast set of hybrid war tactics. This is the economic and trade and technical dimension of this war. And of course, Trump was trying to use these tariffs both as a way of press ganging and intimidating China, but also trying to use it as a way of peeling other countries under the threat of punitive sanctions to ally with the United States against China. That's the larger picture. And you have to really see it as a continuation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a similar plan that the Obama administration started. They spent 5-6 years on it. Trump nixed that because he thought that he could do a full frontal attack with trade, tariffs, and sanctions. That didn't work, so now he's pivoted back to this kind of global tariff regime. Inside that, current situation, Bessent and Trump and his entire team have sorely miscalculated the entire issue. The fact is that trade, if it's done under non-coercive conditions, is mutually beneficial. That is to say, both parties are getting something out of the trade. It's a win-win situation. I go to a restaurant, I get food, they get money. This is great. If I pay them money, but they don't buy anything from me, I can't complain that it's an unequal relationship because they have gotten money and I have gotten food, I've gotten nourishment. If they have run up a tab for me, that's even more to my advantage. I've gotten my food essentially for free, for credit, which is what the US has been doing. It's been printing money and giving it to China, selling them treasuries, and China has had to do labor and manufacture in order to acquire US dollars. So all of that is background to say that the US has made out like a bandit in this China-US trade deal, except the US ruling class made out like a bandit, and the vast majority of working class people didn't benefit. They saw, the United States being deindustrialized and pressures on salaries going down because there was this competition from abroad. On the other hand, in China, everybody benefited. The Chinese used that trade to build public wealth, whereas the United States used it to build private wealth. Now, we all know this is larger context, but inside this deal, remember Trump, levied the 145% tariffs, and then he realized that everything that was coming from China, if he tariffed it, he was essentially embargoing himself. And the US cannot function without Chinese goods, Chinese manufactured goods. China is the manufacturing, shop of the world, and certainly for the United States, including for the US military. The US military gets a vast percentage, probably about 40% of its supply chain from, basic Chinese goods. And so having realized that, Trump dialed that back. And then there was this negotiation, a temporary suspension. And then things were supposed to move carefully towards a mediated resolution with the tariffs dialed back. And then Trump complained that China was withholding rare earth elements. Now, the thing that nobody tells you is that right after they came to this agreement in Geneva about lowering or suspending tariffs, Trump started to sanction Chinese students, threatened to revoke all of their visas, and he also sent out a directive for Chinese chips to be banned all over the world. That is to say, Huawei chips that Huawei made, a Chinese company made, that it made indigenously, they sent out a directive saying that any company or any country that used Huawei's AI Ascend chips would be sanctioned. And so that is this kind of extraordinary extraterritoriality. And so a bunch of very, very aggressive movements, this kind of Jekyll and Hyde behavior from the United States led China to be very, very wary about this negotiation process. Because of that, there was a brief talk between President Xi and President Trump. And then now there is this, I think, rather premature announcement that everything is going to be well, that everything is going to be resolved. I think that what they have is a framework for negotiation. I don't think they have a framework that resolves the issues that are present, namely that the U.S. wants to ice China out, that it wants to keep it from developing, and it's using this hybrid war as a form of, multifaceted, multi-domain warfare against China. Those issues remain. So anything on the surface, beware of it, and beware of the Jekyll and Hyde process, that good cop, bad cop process the United States always brings to its competitors and enemies.
Yeah, Elena, jump in with your analysis.
Right. So, what I was going to say is that the situation is that the United States, and particularly Trump's policies as well, and something that isn't often discussed, is that there's a form of market manipulation that's currently taking place. And this does pave way into like the objectives that they have for China. But it's important to assess the kind of market manipulation that we're talking about. I mean, this is not the first time that Trump has come out and effectively said, right, everything's sorted, we're going to resume as normal, or negotiations are going well. We've seen him do it across the board, and we've also seen him do it with the tariffs. One minute he announces them, and the next minute he kind of takes back or he pauses these tariffs. And he's done it with the tariffs with the 90 countries around the world that he also tariffed, as well as obviously with China. And the purpose of this is to create a sort of fear, possible stock market crashes, bond market crashes. And the entire purpose behind this is to effectively not only just allow for the larger corporations and his billionaire buddies to be able to monopolize the market by essentially wiping out small to medium-sized businesses. But on top of that, he's also targeting the global south, because the moment that you have, you're even entertaining tariffs to the degree that he is, not just towards China, but towards the rest of the world. And like I said, it's just on and off again and on and off again. It creates a sort of market instability in the supply chain that raises the dollar. It creates inflation that ultimately will have an effect on dollar-denominated debt-ridden countries in the global south. And this is very important because as that essentially happens, the global south will not be able to default on their payments or struggle with those payments. And the United States will weaponize that as a tool to effectively coerce these states, one, to be economically unable to engage in economic cooperation or further cooperation with China. And secondly, like KJ also referred to, it also makes it more difficult, or rather he's going to create this sort of conditions by which to blackmail countries into reducing the cooperation with China. And this is very important because at the end of the day, the global south at the same time has everything to gain by cooperating with China at this point in time. Because if anything, Trump's tariff policies and the way that it's fluctuating the global markets and the instability of the dollar, if anything, is proving to countries of the global south that they need to realign themselves with alternatives, being BRICS, being China, and all the opportunities that come along with that. So inadvertently, where we see Trump acting in a way as though he's trying to preserve the dollar as the global currency. In fact, what he's doing is that he's pushing the countries of the global south to find alternatives, whilst at the same time using the tariffs, leveraging the tariffs as a means by which to asphyxiate them economically, so that they to deter them from doing so. But it's a contradiction, and it will have the opposite effect. And that's something that I think is important to always remember with these tariffs.
Yeah, Lee, jump in wherever you'd like to go. I know you've also been to, for example, Tibet. I don't know if you want to speak on the overall situation but please come in.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we can talk about that a little later. I guess I'll stick to the topic at hand for a moment. But yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and specifically the points of de-dollarization, and this reeks of desperation. This is a collapsing empire grasping at straws to try and force much of the world back beneath it, to try and hold on to hegemony. The U.S. is no longer the largest economy. China is, when you purchasing parity factored in, is the largest. And Trump has really united, as was kind of mentioned, united the world against the United States rather quickly, impressively. He's done a really great job of getting the entire world to be like, not only should we unite with each other and maybe work together outside of the United States, but we should also try and get off the dollar where we haven't. It has shown the instability of the United States, the bloodthirsty war machine of the United States, and so much more. But yeah, the U.S. wealth is based, and a lot of our success is based on the petrodollar, and which works with us being the global reserve currency. Both those things are disappearing. I mean, the humanity desperately has to get off of oil in order to survive very long. But besides just that, you have so many countries buying and selling oil outside of the dollar. And of course, the countries that do this are the ones that we really save our greatest ire for, the ones we invade, bomb, and destroy, Iraq, Libya, Syria, etc., Venezuela. The ones with a lot of oil who are selling it outside or trying to sell it outside of the dollar are the ones the U.S. hates the most. And yeah, this has just been sheer desperation, and it seems to have largely backfired, or almost entirely backfired. The whatever deal is ultimately made with China, it's not going to be anything like what Trump said it would be initially. And he's backed off a lot of these tariffs, and really all it's shown is how desperate and unstable U.S. policy is. Not just under Trump, but really before Trump. This is not a new effort by the United States to try and grasp onto hegemony. I mean, the entire proxy war in Ukraine was also premised on this, trying to separate Russia from the rest of the world, including China, but it had the reverse effect. It sent Russia running to China, and now they have a stronger partnership than ever. The blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline also connected to this. If Europe were working really closely with Russia and getting really cheap oil from them, then all of a sudden that's not good for the U.S., not good for the petrodollar. So we'll just commit one of the largest acts of industrial sabotage ever, or industrial terrorism. So yeah, I don't think that it's pretty tough to read this as some kind of win for the United States.
Yeah, I guess, KJ, let's bring you back in regarding this. One of the big talking points here, of course, is these rare earth minerals. And this is all that the Trump team, the Western mainstream media, all that they've been talking about. And in a lot of the reports, what they claim, Axios and others are claiming, is that the reason why these talks are happening now is because both the U.S. and China have leverage over each other, and they're essentially both conceding and caving to their own interests and needs at this time. What do you make or say about this kind of framing? Oh, sorry, you're muted. Unmuted. There you go. I got you.
I think, in a word, that it's cope. They think that China Lutnick and others have said China is at a disadvantage because they need us as a customer. We don't need them. It's actually the other way around. The producer holds the cards, and we can see that because after Trump levied these tariffs, China's exports went up. They increased to other countries. But even if they hadn't, the amount of trade that China does with the United States, the exports to the United States, that's amounts to less than 3% of GDP. That is less than the GDP contribution of a single large city like Shanghai. It's not great, but the United States from the standpoint of China's total GDP, is about as important as a major Chinese city to the Chinese economy. So that notion that this is kind of a mutually enmeshed, disadvantageous situation, I think strongly mischaracterizes the situation. I think it really, as Lee said, it's the U.S. which is in a pickle. The U.S. is at a disadvantage. Otherwise, they would not have come to the negotiating table. They would have, simply held out and tried to bring China down. This is actually a continuation of Trump's earlier trade war in the first Trump administration. It was in 2 phases. I can explain that in more detail. But essentially, this notion that, the rare earths are, the 17 elements of the lanthanide group on the periodic table, plus 4 other elements that are essential for manufacture, essential for industrial manufacture, essential for high-tech manufacture, and also critical for the manufacture of US weapons. For example, certain types of magnets, dysprosium and other types of magnets, metals are needed for these magnets in order for them to tolerate and function inside the high heat of a missile cone. So essentially, the US is realizing that without Chinese rare earth elements, of which China is responsible about 70% of the supply and 90% of the refining, that the US industry cannot function. And also the US military industrial complex cannot function. And so now they're coming to China, hat in hand, and, the Chinese are not making a big deal of it, but everybody knows the US needs Chinese rare earth elements, and they can only get them from China. And every US weapon, requires, hundreds, if not thousands of pounds of Chinese rare earth elements. And so they are coming back. They were upset about it. Now it seems like, there's some agreement reached, but we will see. Again, I think that at this point, it's too early to tell. I think the claims are rather hyperbolic. Essentially, what they did was they agreed on a framework to implement a consensus. In other words, it's a riddle wrapped in a mystery, a lot of word games. The Chinese Foreign Ministry, I just checked their website, has no response. They said, we have no comment. So I think we are far from a resolution on this. And I think that ultimately, and hopefully, the United States will realize that the trade is a good thing, and that it is a very, very bad idea to go to war with China, because you would be cutting off your own supply chain.
Right. Elena, jump right in.
Yeah, so this is the problem that the United States has. This is what happens when you've exported your supply chain to other countries around the world effectively, because you financialized your own economy, and they did that because they want to sustain their own profit margins. Following especially World War II. And now we're seeing how the impacts of that, because much like KJ has, correctly outlined here, is that a lot of these sources that they need to keep their own industries alive are coming from the vast majority of the countries in the global south, and especially from China, including the fact that they own a good percentage of the actual exports that China has to the United States anyway are by subsidiaries that are owned by American companies. And like again, I said, this is the problem with this is the contradictions of globalization. And so this creates a problem for the United States, because where they're trying to effectively assert apparently their authority on the global sort of economic plane, they're coming to realize they no longer have that, because they've exported all power to other countries around the world that are now rising in terms of influence, but also they've become experts in their relative fields of production. And I actually here want to bring in Taiwan into this as well, because in the same light, Trump has actually threatened Taiwan that he's going to put tariffs, or he has threatened, in the past with 100% tariffs on Taiwan and their semiconductor industry. And then obviously he, because Taiwan played ball effectively and stated that they would, give 100 billion in terms of investment into establishing semiconductor fabs inside the United States, etc., among other investments in tech, then that appeased Trump, and he announced it to the public, particularly to his voter base, that he's always trying to rally behind him to show that, okay, there was a win here. But even there, I mean, even when you look at, the gradual transition of the United States in the last 20 or 30 years, even within the semiconductor industry, they were producing around 40% in the 1990s. That's gone down to around, I think, 12 or 13%. And then you've got Taiwan producing 65% of the semiconductor industry, and China coming in at it with 16% and looking to produce up to 70% of the semiconductor sort of industry, to make up 70% of the semiconductor industry by 2030, 2035. And interestingly, so again, you can see how exporting that, your supply chains elsewhere in order to maintain your profit margins, when effectively you've got an overproduction crisis as a result of your free market policies in the United States, has these repercussions. But ironically, even there, I mean, the more he's pushing Taiwan even to start investing into the United States in order supposedly to bring back the industries, which won't actually work, what he's actually doing is giving China an advantage even there, which is going to backfire eventually in the United States, because it's going to make the production of semiconductors for Taiwan that has an economic advantage more expensive and more complicated going forward. That eventually will mean that China, who is progressing fast towards, becoming itself a semiconductor sort of heavyweight, this is the objective, is going to again have a trading advantage. So again, we can see how, the United States, every single time, I mean, this is what happens when, capital controls your economy to this degree, and is driven constantly by profit and greed of these corporations. They constantly use, export. They take advantage of the global, inequalities, and then eventually, you have these countries that now have become essentially experts, and you are no longer having the power to assert yourself on the global stage.
Yeah, Lee, jump right in.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of great points made, and that last point about this is what happens when it's all profit. The planning of the United States is all profit based. It's also generally almost always short-term profit based, usually trying to gain profit in the next year or maybe less. Whereas China, there's plenty of capitalism in China, but the planning, the structural planning is done, 10 years out, 20 years out, and it's done far more largely for creating a society for the people that would benefit a lot of the people. The United States, I mean, I live in Baltimore, all right? We had one of the biggest bridge collapses recently because our bridges are not, they were all built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they're just collapsing around us. And we have 60,000 structurally deficient bridges across the United States, and there seems to be almost zero effort to do anything about it. Let's just keep driving across them to wait and see when the next one goes down. There's still no bullet trains in the United States. The infrastructure is just collapsing. It really is. And there's almost no effort to change that. You can't even come up. Like, when was the last large infrastructure project in the United States that was not just a corporation building something big? So, like, sure, there's, giant pyramids built in Las Vegas for a casino, but I'm talking an actual infrastructure project. The last one I can think of is the Big Dig in Boston, which, was 20 years ago or more.
And it took 20 years to build, by the way.
Yeah, and it took 20 years to build. Yeah. It took forever to build. But it's just not a thing that the United States does. There's nothing done for the people, long-term planning. It just does not exist. It's exclusively about, profit for the most powerful and richest people in the world. That's how our system is set up.
Wow, a Big Dig reference. I was in Boston at that time. It was horrible. The traffic was incredible. For like a decade, the traffic was just ridiculous. Just for a tiny tunnel that took about
Yeah, yeah.
many years.
Meanwhile,
A third of my life.
China built hospitals in like a matter of days. It's a big difference. Yeah.
KJ,
Danny?
I want
Yeah,
yes. Do you have
Danny,
more?
there is
Yeah.
a big project that was built in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is the San Francisco Bay Bridge. They had to, rebuild it after the Loma Prieta earthquake, and it took them a good almost 2 decades. And essentially, it was built by China. It was a Chinese construction firm, and now that kind of stuff is not happening anymore.
Yeah.
Well, how about we pivot? I wanted to pivot to perhaps the military component, because the economic component with regard to China certainly has a broader conflict theater to it. And I just want to pull up a few reports. First is China sends 2 aircraft carriers into the Pacific for the first time, sending warships beyond Japan. The Chinese Navy is demonstrating its ability to project air power and sea power far past its home waters. Now, there's also another interesting report I wanted to show you. Taiwan thinks the unthinkable, resisting China without America. And the big argument here in the, of course, British war machine's mouthpiece, The Economist, is that the way Trump is treating Ukraine is having reverberations with Taiwan. People are fearing that Taiwan will not be able to hold out against China in a war. So, KJ, to you, what's your reaction to this? Because it seems like every other day, or maybe even more than this, we have reports about this coming war on China that aren't getting the kind of attention I think they deserve.
Well, I mean, the first parenthetical statement I will make is that, beware of anything you see in The Economist. The Economist is like, the unreliable, ideological, snarky narrator of imperial propaganda. It's how the British do their propaganda, with snark and superiority. But ultimately, it is full of cope and mendacity. Is it conceivable that Taiwan could resist Taiwan could resist in a contestation with China? Of course not. Most of its economy comes from China, from trade with China. Some of its islands, the adjacent islands, get their water and their electricity from China. If China were to blockade Taiwan, it has 2-3 weeks of natural gas. So of course it's not possible, it's not thinkable. And of course, if you talk to the experts like Lyle Goldstein of the Naval War College, he says that even with the full support of the United States, the United States could not win a war against China over Taiwan. Essentially, it would have its rear end handed to it very, very rapidly. And that's what multiple war games have said over and over and over again. This is not something that can be, it is not something that is winnable for the empire, and certainly not for the empire's quisling all by itself. But if you see this kind of discourse between, say, for example, Lyle Goldstein and Elbridge Colby, who is currently the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Colby asserts that even if they can't win, they should just go ahead with it anyway, because for him, it's personal, it's ideological. Taiwan is the first domino of global, Chinese hegemonic rampage. China has to be stopped there, or else, we'll be fighting them in Missouri. So there's something very deeply, deeply ideological there. And of course, the US plan, and if you go back to Elbridge Colby in 2015, he's been ranting about this for at least a decade now. He wants nuclear war. He wants to incorporate tactical nuclear weapons, first strike using nuclear weapons against China. It's all in the record, black and white, in writing. He's been saying this since 2015 when he was at CNAS. So clearly, the United States wants to use Taiwan to provoke war. When they say we want to deter war, you need to translate that. Deterrence means provoke. They want to use Taiwan as the trigger because it is the most obvious trigger. It's the pawn on the 8th row of the chessboard. It cannot be left alone. Taiwan is family for China. The people on Taiwan Island, they all have family. Almost all of them have family on the mainland in Fujian province. It is a province of China. But if you think of the family analogy, it's like, okay, you have a member of the family who's estranged themselves. They've locked themselves in the basement. Okay, you might be able to deal with that. Hopefully they'll come to their senses. But if they start stockpiling guns and gasoline and explosives in the basement, then the question becomes, how long can you tolerate that? How long is it before you have to take some kind of approach to interdicting this massive escalation, this massive staging of your own home for nefarious and aggressive purposes? And that is exactly what is happening right now. The U.S. has acknowledged that it already has U.S. troops on Taiwan Island. It's not supposed to. It's agreed not to militarize the island, 3 communiques and all that, but it already went on the record saying that we have at least 500 U.S. troops on there already. And of course, the entire island is being turned into a staging zone for war against China. The U.S. thinks that it can win a war because why? Because 6% to 7%, 6% of the U.S. adult population believes that they can win a fight against a grizzly bear. This is the same kind of thinking translated to the military domain. This is, that equivalent. They think that they can win a war against China on their own doorstep. And it's absolute madness, absolute insanity. But the U.S. is still persisting, and they're still driving into the paint over and over and over again to see if they can draw the foul, to see if you can get the entire stadium to come down and start to have a brawl with China.
Yeah, Elena, I wonder if you could also, whatever you want to react to what KJ said, but also talk about your impressions on the way that the current Trump administration, how maybe the calculus has changed, or if there's been any changes at all that you've noticed with regard to this militarist policy toward China.
I would say there hasn't been, because if we recall back in early 2024 last year, also in 2023, we saw actually, and I think it was late 2023, we saw the Biden administration issue some of the largest defense packages to, it was to Israel, to Ukraine, and then it was also to Taiwan. So this militarization of Taiwan for the purpose of arming them against China has been a longstanding policy, and we also saw it occur under the Biden administration as well. And what I wanted to note about The Economist, the article from The Economist there, is to notice the language, or like the diegesis that they're running with, which is essentially like, is Taiwan going to have to face the wrath of China, and so and it must prepare as such. What this is doing is trying to galvanize the public towards helping and supporting any sort of funding for Taiwan, while simultaneously villainizing China. We've seen the same rhetoric when it comes to the sort of the American proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. The whole idea of, if we don't continue to funnel and fund the Ukrainian sort of military capacity to fight Russia, we are essentially abandoning Ukraine, and Ukraine cannot fight this on its own. And they were doing this with regards to Ukraine for the better part of a decade, when they were slowly funding Ukrainian military. And obviously we saw even the UK with Operation Orbital, as well as many other operations that they were using to train Ukrainian military, as well as obviously giving them, in 2019, Trump, who had been the one to actually even start providing lethal aid to Ukraine, even though now he comes, he's trying to advocate that he is pro-peace, but that's another conversation. The point is, we have seen this rhetoric before in Ukraine, and we're seeing the same thing happening now in Taiwan. And the other angle I wanted to add to this, with regards as well, with KJ had said, no, they can't also win a war with China. But this is the point that he made with regards to using tactical nuclear weapons, is exactly what I was going to say, because the idea is not to win the war per se, but to inflict, in their view, as much damage as possible to China, to damage the Chinese economy, to distress. Like, this is what their objective is. I don't think it's possible, but I'm trying to get into the sort of rationale that they're trying to I guess, follow through with, so as to deter China's progress and to destabilize its, I guess, its international trade corporations, it's the BRI project, among many other collaborations it has throughout the world, so as to, in doing so, to as to sustain U.S. and Western hegemony over this region. And we're seeing the same thing play out with Iran as well. But without getting into Iran, with regards to China, this is what they're trying to do, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the way, if we look historically at how the United States functioned and how it's accumulated its wealth, it has accumulated its wealth. I mean, especially after World War II, it functions off of chaos and destruction. And destruction means it's a way to, as I've said, deal with their particular overproduction crisis, and simultaneously, by establishing these sort of war, this autocratic and war-torn economies for itself anyway, it allows them to, I guess, monopolize and take huge chunks of the market share at the risk of its own self. So what they're trying to do is inflict as much damage as possible on China, destabilize the world economy to the degree that the corporatists, the ruling classes, the elite, the 1% that we often talk about, even smaller than the 1%, they're then able to capitalize on these market instabilities, countries, like I said, defaulting on their debts, but also simultaneously having, establishing a war economy around the world that they can then jump in and appropriate huge chunks of the market everywhere. This is what they're trying to do, while simultaneously putting a stopper, so they think, on China's progress until, so to give them, I guess, the ability to buy time to expand their own economy in order to thwart China. This, in my opinion, is not going to work. However, I'm just speaking with regards to, this is what I feel their objectives are with going to war with China, trying to instigate war with China, even though it will not work. They cannot defeat China, and they cannot stop the track that we are on. This is just the natural order of things.
Yeah, Lee, certainly any reaction you have.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. They're trying to do the same thing, as was said, with Taiwan that they did with Ukraine. It's not only does the U.S. hope they can balkanize portions of China, Taiwan, Tibet, etc., but then also it serves the purpose of, if the U.S. can succeed with the propaganda game, they can say, oh my God, look, Russia invaded Ukraine. Of course, we ignore the entire history that happened before 2022. We ignore 2014. We ignore the fact that even the New York Times has said the CIA was operating in Ukraine on the border of Russia since at least 2014, likely far before that. You ignore the entire history. You go, oh my God, Russia invaded Ukraine. And they're hoping to create the same situation with China and Taiwan so that they can then cut off put sanctions on them, get the world to put sanctions on them, cut off economic ties with certain countries. It has largely backfired with Russia. I mean, we've seen a lot of countries actually say, no, we're not going to go along with this sanctions regime, this economic war against Russia. As already mentioned, it pushed Russia and China closer together. But I do think absolutely that is the aim of the United States, to attempt to balkanize China and then to economically sideline them with sanctions. But the positive note in this is, I don't think it will work. But on top of that, the world is not buying U.S. propaganda the way they used to. I mean, the U.S. used to have such a, not monopoly, but so much of the market of world news that they could create a propaganda fake world that a lot of people bought into or believed. And that just seems to be collapsing. I mean, it's just shredding. I talked about this the other day on my show, Unredacted Tonight. It's the U.S. propaganda is just not holding water around the world. Israel's genocide in Gaza is a great example of the world is not buying the U.S. and Israel's line that this is acceptable behavior or necessary behavior to genocide a people like this. It will not work the way the U.S. wants it to.
Yet, KJ, the United States continues to pursue this policy. Talk about where you believe this is all headed, because on the one hand, you have the United States um, continuing to amplify this aggression toward China. On the other hand, you have the United States also mired in a kind of global conflagration of its own making in West Asia, of course, Ukraine. But that's not even the end of it. And when we think about the entirety of the US's so-called power projection. So talk about where you believe this is all heading.
Well, I hate to say this, Danny, but I believe that this is headed in a very, very dangerous place. It's heading towards war, not simply war with China, but I believe that it will result in world war. I believe that the US ruling imperial elite are preparing nuclear war, as we can see in the policy papers, as we can see in Elbridge Colby's statement, as we can see in, for example, the recently released paper from the Atlantic Council, which counseled the deliberate use of nuclear weapons in a war over Taiwan. So I think this is a very, very dangerous situation. I don't want to sound like Scott Ritter, but I think that, there are some very, very high risks, high stakes involved. Regarding what Lee said, I agree with him. The propaganda is not as effective as it was before, certainly not in the global South, in the rest of the world, but still inside the United States, it is still very, very powerful. People are still powerfully indoctrinated. And that essentially goes to the fact that the US is high on its own supply. Its ruling elite tells itself lies, and then it believes them. For example, this whole myth of brainwashing, etc., during the Korean War, it was a way of, discounting the actual real atrocities that were happening in the Korean War when US hostages, prisoners of war, confessed to what they had been doing in the Korean War, constant, massive atrocities, war crimes. In order to paper that over, they created this, trope of brainwashing, that somehow the Chinese had gotten inside their heads and then made them say absurd things. And then, having believed this lie, then they created their own project called MK Ultra, which was to do what the Chinese had done, which, makes absolutely no sense, because the Chinese hadn't done it. They'd simply appealed to these airmen's consciences, and many of them did, really have, a crisis of conscience. But all of this boils back down to the core fact that the United States' core strength is not its military, but it's in advertising and PR. It's in storytelling, and it's in flim-flam, it's in narrative. The US controls the narrative, certainly for its domestic population. That's why people still think that China is a threat. So it's a culture that's built on lying, and then you have the lawyers who are specialized liars leading the country. It's a country which is led by lawyers, as opposed to China, which is a country led by scientists. And so then you have that, this tradition goes very deep. It goes back, say, for example, to the patent medicines and the revival tents. The first newspapers in the United States were created to advertise these patent medicines. That's, the Gannett newspapers. So all of this is to say, I think that we are headed towards chaos and war, and I wish it weren't the case. And I think that there's going to be a continual, pardon my French, shitstorm of propaganda and self-deception. So this is what we're up against, and this is why we have to fight so hard to, get rid of this extraordinary toxic brew of propaganda. It's currently, we're in the phase of manufacturing consent for war, and the farther we are from the truth, the closer we are to war. Those who tell you absurdities are preparing you for atrocities.
I would definitely want to pass this same question to both you, Elena, and Lee, and then we can get to some audience questions, but please.
Yeah. So if you look at my previous answer, it alludes to exactly the same point that KJ made. They're looking for a war, not just war with China, but this is going to turn into a global conflict. They're also antagonizing Iran. I mean, there's also a lot, if you would permit me just to touch on that topic a little bit, but it sort of will make a greater point. I mean, even if you look at Iran, I mean, Trump is using the notion of trying to establish some sort of deal with Iran, but the conditions that he's providing Iran with, which is absolutely no to uranium enrichment, which he knows for a fact, and the U.S. administration knows for a fact that is a red line for Iran, and then using the threat of military interventionism and military action. Whilst we also have Israel, who has been strategizing, training, and apparently, according to CNN, there is intelligence information that the US has intercepted that showed that Israel is ready to target Iran. And we also do know, based on a policy report, and one of the most important policy reports that I have referenced a copious times in my work, which is The Path to Persia. And in that particular report, they outline the fact that they're going to use Israel as a means to justify an attack on Iran, or rather allow Bibi, and in fact there's a chapter called Leave It to Bibi, encourage Israel. It says to encourage Israel to attack Iran and then further justify attacks on Iran, possibly its nuclear capabilities, nuclear facilities rather, and oil refineries, so as to be able to essentially cripple Iran's economy. Now, this is a country that for over 3 decades, 4 decades has faced huge economic sanctions that have depleted its economy, and it's only just begun coming out of it, as obviously we're seeing the new realliance of nations happening within the global south, and with the inauguration of BRICS and the establishment of the BRI and its integration with China and Russia, and the backlash that the sanctions have effectively had by creating alliances between sanctioned countries. So we are seeing Iran for the first time essentially be able to establish itself as an economy and also be able to grow. And it's also a central part to China's general economic objectives in terms of, establishing multipolarity. I mean, Iran is also central to key trade routes and resources that China needs, and BRICS need, and the BRI need, in order to actually be able to succeed in the project that they have in combating imperialism. Therefore, I mean, targeting Iran, for example, instigating war with Iran, many have said, well, that will be suicide. But it will be something that they're willing to do, because if you're able to cripple Iran's economy to that degree, you're able to effectively, they're going to try to target China in that way, try to obstruct any sort of means by which multipolarity threatens their hegemony. So just like they're, organizing and trying to manufacture consent for war between China and Taiwan, just as we've seen with Ukraine and Russia, we're seeing the same thing take place in Iran, and this is going to disrupt the entire global supply and economy, and also obviously put the global South in a situation where countries are going to have to effectively try to realign themselves. So we are looking at a global conflict that's going to be manufactured for the purpose of obstructing any source or potential to Western hegemony and Western imperialism. And it's, unfortunately, it is obviously a daunting thought to have, but this is the only means by which they're able to, I guess, maintain, or they think that it's their last option, that desperation to maintain power, because otherwise the ruling elite, the imperialist elite in the United States, would effectively have to relinquish power, except to socialize and change their entire economic structures, something they're never going to be willing to do. So therefore, the world is going to have to take that hit. And if we're going to be a little positive about this, as history has proven, it also becomes a window of opportunity for, change, and it will have a boomerang impact on the United States, and particularly on these, elitists, these corporations that are running the political dynamics around the world. It will weaken them substantially. But this is, I would agree with KJ, this is the agenda that they have.
Lee.
Yeah, I want to sum up what she just said with beware a cornered tiger. That's it. The United States is still incredibly powerful militarily, and they're losing hegemony. They're losing control of the world. They're losing the power of the petrodollar. And so it's just, you know, I want to imagine that they react completely like adults and rationally, and they decide to start cooperating with other nations and use diplomacy and decide to just work together in a beautiful future. But I don't know if that's what I would predict for these absolute sociopaths. Unfortunately, I do think that, you know, war can look a lot of different ways. And I think a lot of it nowadays is done. It's not just nuclear weapons. I mean, God forbid we get there, but there's just so many different avenues of war. There's obviously economic war, which the U.S. is already fully involved in. But then there's, you know, the various forms of digital warfare. And we've seen the chaos caused in Spain they lost their power for several days. Then within a week, they lost all telecommunications for a day or something. And, you know, some suspect that might have to do with Israel's unhappiness with Spain standing up against their genocide. And I think we're going to see more war like that. And you shut off the power, you shut off the communications, and things get gnarly pretty quick. So we could see a lot of different styles of war. It's not necessarily just guns. And, you know, I mean, we keep our Congress is so antiquated and our Pentagon is so antiquated that they keep pumping out tanks, which are sitting empty in the California desert, thousands of tanks, because tank warfare is not really a thing anymore. But, you know, that's our Pentagon. They have tens of trillions of dollars of unaccounted for financial adjustments. They literally don't know where it is. The Pentagon has never been audited. They've attempted to do it 6 or 7 times. Every time after a year of being audited, they just say we failed the audit, and that's the end of it. The last one, they announced they couldn't account for 63% of all of their assets. So our Pentagon is just a giant bloodthirsty $1 trillion a year machine. And who knows where a lot of it goes. A lot of it goes to black budgets and things we don't even know are going on. Of course, none of this is really done with the people's consent. This is not democracy. None of these decisions are what Americans want. And it just shows how much our democracy doesn't exist any longer, if it ever did. And I covered some of this on Unredacted tonight recently as well. And just the last thing, just so I can mention my trip to Tibet, which was really wonderful. A few months ago, I got back. I went to Tibet and got back a few months ago. And to go back to the topic of propaganda, it's just amazing how different it is than U.S. propaganda would have you believe. I mean, you know, we act like they don't have religious freedom, but I met and filmed videos with so many Buddhist monks and nuns, and there's also plenty of mosques, etc. Also, the idea that people are, you know, forced into these new towns, but we went to see the new towns and the old towns, the villages that barely have power and barely have, you know, toilets and things like that. And these people were offered a choice. Would you like a new town with power and toilets and things like that, heating and etc.? And most of them, not all, some stayed in the old villages, but most of them were like, that sounds like a better way of life for us. And so a lot of them made the move. And then you get back to the United States and they're like, everyone's forced to relocate to get electricity. It's just such garbage.
Oh, well, let's thank you all for those answers. Incredible analysis. Let's get to, there's only a few audience questions, and so this will just be jump in, you know, whoever wants to answer, you can answer. The first one is from Iranian Kiddo. Knowing Iranians' nuclear sites are deep in the mountains and can't be destroyed, is the talk of war supposed to intimidate Iranians? Whoever wants to jump in. Alina, I don't know. It seems like you might want to.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I was going to say is, this is why, actually, interestingly, the same CNN article that was published to try to pass the burden of blame fully on Israel, because they want to use the ability, you know, the plausible deniability that it's not the United States, it's really Israel. I mean, Israel serves in multiple different ways, the imperial power. In that particular article, they were effectively saying, just like the policy policy report that I referenced earlier, The Path to Persia, for those that are interested in reading it, from the Brookings Institute, that you would need the US sort of military assistance. And they would basically be using sort of like these cluster bombs that would basically try to infiltrate deep into the ground as possible. But it's not just even about their nuclear facilities. It would mostly be about targeting their oil facilities and basically anything that keeps the Iranian economy afloat. And like Lee just said, war doesn't necessarily have to mean, all guns blazing and just everybody slaughtering each other. Economic warfare is equally, if not more, lethal. I mean, we've seen the impact the sanctions have had. I mean, if you look at what the impact of sanctions had on Iraq back in the 90s, 1.5 million people died of starvation because of US sanctions on Iraq. This is, I mean, you don't necessarily need, to have a full-out war with Iran. You can just inflict so much damage on their economy that is already fragile and just now being able to sort of come into its own. And then as that happens, effectively, you set them back, and you can then use those sanctions and use your economic leverage to try to deplete Iran as much as possible. So, this is something that the US will try to do, and they're going to use Israel to do it. But everybody, as the policy report outlines, knows that it would actually be the United States behind the scenes, that only the United States has that capacity to do so. And I just want to bring up one last thing. I don't know if anybody else wants to discuss this, but I mean, with Iran's recent sort of intelligence apparently acquiring Israeli information that they're going to be gradually releasing, that's going to be interesting going forward, because this could possibly mean that Iran has strategic knowledge as to Israel's particular nuclear, incognito nuclear capabilities, as well as to what this means for the nuclear deal going forward. But, that's also going to come into play. However, I believe that they're still going to try targeting Iran either way.
Yeah, whoever. Sure, Lee.
Yeah, and I just want to add in here, perhaps on an optimistic note, I mean, somehow the Houthis in Yemen were able to defeat us in the span of 30 days. So, because Trump basically gave his military 30 days to crush the Houthis and then just gave up because they had not depleted their abilities at all. They had taken down like a dozen drones of ours. It really changed nothing over the 30 days where it was like, yeah, just bomb them as much as you can and let's see what we can do. And they achieved almost nothing and then made a deal with them.
Yeah, and the Wall Street Journal is quoted as calling the U.S. Navy's confrontation with Ansar Allah, with Yemen, as the most challenging naval conflict for the United States since World War II. So, that's a huge statement to make. It just shows exactly what you just said, Lee. KJ, do you have anything you want to add to this question?
Yes, just following up on what Lee said, the U.S. not only, turned tail and ran out of Ansar Allah from the Red Sea based on the attacks from Ansar Allah. And we know that, Yemen is the fourth poorest country on the planet. And for the most powerful military to lose not only drones, but also its top fighter jets and have to leave is an incredibly humiliating event. But notice how the media and the Pentagon is spinning it. They're saying literally that this has actually prepared us for war with China. They said this has been very salutary. It's been a great testing ground. We're going to take all these lessons, and then this has been just a really great training for us to go to war with China. Let's put the historical context straight. Not only is the U.S. being chased out by Ansar Allah, but in 1950, the U.S. actually went to war against China. This was an impoverished, poor China that had 30 years of civil war and anti-colonial war. And the Chinese went to war against the United States directly. They sent 3 million troops and laborers to fight the United States. They were so poor that some of the troops didn't have coats in the Korean winter. Only 1 out of 3 Chinese troops actually had a rifle. They were wearing sneakers, cotton canvas sneakers in the snow. And yet they delivered the greatest strategic defeat to the 8th Army that it has ever had in its history. To this day, if you meet a Korean War vet, they will talk in, reverent but traumatized tones about how fierce and how courageous the Chinese were. And I think this is a misunderstanding. The U.S., when China was poor, impoverished, and incapable, it was not capable of winning a war against China. Certainly, China is hundreds of times more powerful now, but it believes that it is capable of going to war against China and prevailing because it's just lost a war against a battle against Ansar Allah. This is the deep irrationality that pervades our ruling class. And as I said, it's the grizzly bear fallacy, but I've also compared it, to the drunk at the bar. The empire is closing. The bar is closing. Final call has been made. And the drunk at the bar has struck out. His credit cards are being rejected. Everything's de-dollarizing. Struck out with everybody. And he will not go home. He's spoiling for a fight. He wants to pick a fight with someone or anybody. And he's literally drunk with power. So this is the dangerous situation that we're facing. The ruling imperial elite does not want to go home. They don't want to roll up the empire and be sane and rational and decent with the rest of the world. And they would rather see the end of the planet than the end of their power and privilege. And that's what is so dangerous.
Well, we have one question left here, and this is it. Alina, let me know if your camera is all right. But if Taurus missiles need U.S. military targeting and the Pentagon doesn't provide it, can't Ukraine just get it via Israel, since Israel has long had carte blanche with the U.S. military? So whoever would like to answer this, if anybody.
Oh, sorry, I'm just kind of catching up on the question for a
Oh,
second.
no, it's okay. If Taurus missiles need U.S. military targeting data and the Pentagon can't provide it, can't Ukraine get it via Israel, since Israel has carte blanche within U.S. military?
I think we have seen the Ukrainian military actually receive a lot of assistance along these lines, even intelligence as well as weaponry from Israel. So yes, I think they definitely could. We have seen that sort of alliance take place already in Ukraine. Which is why relationships between Russia and Israel have begun to become more estranged, even before obviously 2023, because of the assistance that Israel was able to give Ukraine.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that too, KJ, with Putin recently met with Naftali Bennett. He hasn't met with Netanyahu in quite some time. KJ.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to understand is that modern warfare is not about weapons, or certainly not about weapons platforms per se, but in the interconnections between them, the way they communicate and coordinate. This is how modern joint arms warfare functions. They refer to it as a kill chain. You have sensors, and then you have, battle management software, and then all of that is channeled back into, weapons platforms, etc., etc. And all of this incredibly complex joint arms, multi-domain warfare, all of that is enabled through encrypted connections and massive intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and C6, C5, etc. All of this is incredibly complex, and it cannot be done without the United States or its lackey Israel. And therefore, and this is the core thing, it's, touching back on what Lee said, is that, warfare happens not simply in the kinetic physical domain, but it happens in the cyber domain. And it's not simply cyber warfare per se, although that is a key part of the subkinetic and prekinetic dimension of the war, but all of war is connected through this nervous system, this electronic nervous system that coordinates how this war is waged. And what is happening right now is that nervous system is becoming automated through the use of AI. And so, for example, you have Palantir and Anduril. These are the people that have been facilitating the genocide in Gaza through the use of AI. They brag that they have been doing this, and they brag that they're going to do this to China. And so what we're seeing right now is the internet of dangerous things. We're seeing attacks like we saw in Lebanon, the pager attacks. We also see similar types of attacks in the Philippines. It's not very well covered, but the Filipino rebels are seeing the same types of attacks on their cell phones and their electronic systems that are fatal, lethal. And then, of course, we recently saw the attack on Russia, that spiderweb strategic attack, which also was all about intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Without that, those attacks against strategic bombers would not have been possible. So all of this is to say that we're in the thick of this hybrid war. And in some sense, we have to understand that it's not that we are escalating to World War III. We're actually already in it. It's just that we're not seeing it everywhere. But those that electronic coordination and that electronic warfare, that cyber warfare, is already happening. So our work is cut out for us. And this is why we have to, all of us, put our shoulders to the wheel. And one of the places each and every one of us can do is to resist the temptation to be pulled into the information warfare, to be a vector of propaganda. That's one of the first places that we can start to resist and assert our human rationality and sanity.
Oh, sorry, Lee. Anything you want to add? I was muted.
No, I think pretty much nailed it on that one. Very important to not allow our brains to become a part of this battlefield. Although they have actually admitted that in some think tanks that the next battlefield is the human brain, and they're working towards that. Thank you, Palantir.
Indeed. Well, this was great, everyone. I'm just going to quickly thank the super chatters before we all head out here. So thanks for becoming a new member, Nuis Blog. Thank you, Munzer Chahab, for this. Thanks, Time to Get Up. Appreciate that. Thank you, Empire. We are. Thank you to Extra Medium. Thank you, Peng Yo. Nida Peng Yo. You're my friend. And we have Empire We Are again, and then Peng Yo became a member. So thanks so much, everybody, for that. This was a great panel. Be sure, maybe I can go around all three of you to just pitch what you guys are doing, because all the links are in the video description, from Lena's work to Lee's work, and also KJ's on report on the China report. So maybe Lee, how about you go first, and then we'll just go around the world.
Thanks. For people who haven't seen it, I restarted my show Redacted Tonight, except now it's completely independent. It's called Unredacted Tonight. And you can just go to leecamp.com/unredacted. That'll take you straight to the YouTube page. We're like 14 episodes in. And, comedy, news, and occasionally guests like Abby Martin, Richard Wolf, Chris Hedges. But yeah, check it out. leecamp.com/unredacted.
Great. Lena, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to continue. I basically, like I said, I'm a contributor on Colonial Outcast with Greg Stoker, which I know you've had on the show, I think, once before. I'll be continuing to obviously do episodes there. But I also, like I said, I do have my Substack where I write articles and pieces. I also do collaborations with other media outlets, depending. And my Patreon is where you can find a lot of my own work. I have also just started my own YouTube page. That's just more for evergreen episodes on economic breakdowns and analysis that are, as much of like the conversations that we had today.
Yeah, and I put those links in the video description. KJ.
And I just released a show on the Breakthrough News Network. I'm the host of the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network, or one of the hosts. And we just released a show on Pete Hegseth's crusade against China. War is peace. Pete Hegseth demands Asian nations join crusade against China. Please check it out. There's some very, very important news. It's an interview with Ben Norton and with my co-host, Megan Russell from Code Pink.
Amazing, everyone. Well, this was a great show. Please do hit the like button as we head out of here. Be sure to check out all of our guests' work in the video description, from Alastair to KJ to Alina to Lee. You can also find all the places to support this channel, from Patreon, Substack, and much more there as well. Without further ado, I'll be back again, I think actually live in a week. So enjoy weekends, and I'll be back again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.